Here we go. A Monday version of Dualistic Unity Raw. This one should be a lot of fun for a number of reasons. I'm going to pass it over to Andrew here very shortly, but I do want to mention a couple of things. The first of which is that we have another community topics episode coming up in about a week or so. If you haven't suggested your topic in our community Discord, definitely jump on to the Discord. Go to the community topics channel and suggest a topic in the next couple of days. We will be putting the vote up as of Wednesday or Thursday on Patreon, and you can vote for the winning topic that we do an episode about next week. And if you haven't listened to the community topics episodes as yet, definitely go and check them out. There's almost 40 of them now, and we cover a lot of stuff. Everything from artificial intelligence to Freemasonry and secret societies. And then we talk about cancer and the placebo effect. There's a lot of stuff is what I'm saying. So definitely check that out. Next, I wanted to mention very quickly, if you happen to be listening to the podcast, you like the podcast, and you are on a podcast platform such as Apple Podcasts or Spotify or anything like that, we'd really appreciate it if you would drop us a review. That's it. You don't have to by any means. It doesn't have to be more than a few words. It doesn't even have to be words if it's just a star system. But we'd really appreciate it. It helps the podcast. It helps us spread the conversation, bring more people into it so that they can benefit from the community. It's just a lot of help. And I just wanted to throw that out there, and I'll stop talking and pass it to Andrew now.
Yeah, I'm always kind of curious what the podcast algorithm is like, because it's hard to find anything on that. So if anyone listening has any idea what goes into the podcast algorithm, that would be appreciated as well. Not that we would really change anything, but maybe just how things are shared and whatnot and things, because there's definitely something there. Maybe it's with reviews, maybe it's frequency of uploads, maybe it's, I don't know, I guess probably watch time is a part of it, listen time, and then people, making lists and whatnot. But yeah, with the community topics, they're always a blast. The synchronicities one, that's one of my favorites as well. That was a lot of fun. But yeah, I don't necessarily have any announcements to add, but I do have some stuff I was thinking about. I filmed a video yesterday on meditation, and basically I was editing it this morning, and I'll probably post it after our calls later today. But basically just how most people get into meditation in order to improve themselves, in order to become a more peaceful person, a calmer person. And it's for a reason that will be then fulfilled in the future, essentially, even if it's immediately after you meditate or whatever. But it's not for the sake of doing it. And I think it's kind of a lost art or a lost practice, doing things for the sake of doing them, like living for the experience that you're having, because your life is the experience that you're having. And so if you're always doing things for the sake of doing other things, then you're going to end up missing your whole life. You're always doing something for something else, for an alternative outcome. So if you start meditating and become a calmer and more peaceful person, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but all that meditation really is, and I talk about this in the videos, is just paying attention to your experience. Like, that's all that it is. So if you're doing that and then trying to get to another spot or become something else, you're not really paying attention to the experience you're having. And then once you realize that meditation is just paying attention, you won't feel as much of a need to sit down with your eyes closed, because you'll see that if it's just about paying attention, then you can meditate throughout your entire day, every single moment of your life. And again, I'm not saying that you shouldn't meditate. It's absolutely something that is a reasonable thing to do, but I think it can almost take away from the attention that you pay throughout the rest of your day, because you're like, all right, I'm going to do this. I'm going to segment out this portion and meditate during this time, and then that's going to carry me throughout the rest of my day. Like, that's going to set me up for a great day. And again, nothing wrong with it, but it may almost take some of how much weight you put into paying attention throughout the rest of your day. As you section off that time to meditate, you're like, all right, that's my meditation time, 10 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, whatever. And then the rest of my day, that kind of like plays into the rest of my day. But it's just the time that you're doing it. If you're paying attention during that time, that's the time that you're spending paying attention. and that's all it is. So then you stop doing it, and then what? You stop paying attention, or do you continue paying attention? If you continue paying attention, then you may realize you don't need to do it then, because it doesn't. I don't think it has the carryover that people think, and that's something that I thought for a very long time, was like, oh, if I don't meditate, then I'm not going to be able to take on my day. Then I'm not going to be able to handle things that come up. But so it almost, I don't know, it can take away from the attention that people pay throughout the rest of their day. And when you stop doing it, you'll realize that every single moment has the opportunity to do so. So I just, I don't know. I find it interesting. And of course, society is going to come up with all of these reasons to do so, all these, perceived benefits of sitting down with your eyes closed for a while, and brain measurement scans and whatnot. But it's just about the attention. So if you're doing that throughout the rest of the day, then the quote unquote benefits of it, which is just fulfilled throughout, it's fulfilling in and of itself to pay attention, are just, they just trickle into every other component of your life. And so I don't know, I think it's a way of looking at meditation that's a little bit different than what a lot of people kind of focus on it for. And I think if you focus too much on it in order to become something else, it can actually hinder your ability to live your life in the best possible way, which again, no best possible way, but it can just take away from the rest of your experience when you focus so much on doing it for the sake of something else, as opposed to just meditating for the sake of meditating.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as always, right? It comes down to the descriptions, not the described. We get lost in the word. So I would even go so far as to actually say, don't meditate. And I'll put that meditate in quotations. And it's just because immediately when you say, I'm going to meditate, you get images in your head of what that means. You get this idea of what meditation is. Like meditation itself is a thing, is an actual like action that you're going to do. It's something separate from the etymology of meditate, from the actual root of the word meditate, which was just to ponder or contemplate. Right. So it's almost like we'd be better off if we didn't know the word and have all of these assumptions that go with it. Right. Immediately we have the assumptions of meditation, and we start thinking of like Buddhist monks and people on mountaintops and shit like that. We start thinking of people in the lotus position or chanting or things like that. And it's just because we've been given this idea that meditation is even from another culture, that meditation is religious or spiritual or anything other than just sitting down and allowing yourself to process with attention. That's exactly what it is. It's just that the concept gets in the way, and so it's why I'm hesitant to tell people to meditate, because immediately they'll go, "Oh, I know what that is," and they'll go and get a cushion and try and figure out the lotus position, and it's just like, that's not it. It just pay attention, stop judging your thoughts, stop grabbing onto each one like it's the truth, and just go through your life paying attention. That's pretty much it. Life is meditation. Life is contemplation, if you choose it to be.
Yeah, exactly. Because your idea of meditation is not meditation, as you said, the description's not the described. And so when you understand what it actually is, and it's just, I didn't even know that the etymology was to ponder like that, because then it's just pondering life and pondering every experience that you're having and pondering every situation that you're in, and everything that you go through is that. And it can be like life is meditation at that point. It doesn't have to be something separate. And if you are separating itself, as I was saying before, like if you do separate it, it almost inherently takes something away from the time that you're not doing it, because there's the conceptual idea. And then what's even fucking more detrimental is then people identify with being a meditator and they think that they're better because of it. And it's again, not to say, it just kind of gets annoying when someone's like, have you meditated today? Oh, you should take up meditation. It's like, you just pay attention to the experience that you're going through, and that is the best meditation you can ever do. And so yeah, it's interesting when people get very caught in that, thinking that it's improving themselves, which it can even become this habitual thing that I don't know, it can be like a little bit detrimental, I think, to the rest of your life, until you realize that it just isn't necessary to sit down with your eyes closed for an extended period of time, because you can just pay attention to everything that you're going through and fully do so. And you'll realize that, oh, you sit down with your eyes closed for like, 6, 7, 8 hours a day when you're sleeping. So you're already doing that for a while, and then you can just continue living your life and doing things. And again, if you enjoy it for the sake of doing it and enjoy the time of just kind of sitting there and doing it, then by all means, I'm not saying don't do it, but it's just when you get caught in the idea of it and kind of becomes like this cultural thing, I don't know, it can take quite a bit away from it. But
it can become another form of control. That's really what it can become. It can become another mechanism that, oh, I'm having a bad day, I haven't meditated, or oh my God, I'm gonna have a stressful day, I better meditate, and it's kind of like becoming a weekend warrior in terms of going to church on Sundays. The rest of the time I'm an egotistical prick, but I go to church on Sundays, so I'm all topped up, that kind of thing. And so yeah, meditation unfortunately does, it really just does get in the way when it becomes a thing you do that defines you and is a mechanism towards something. Whereas, if you can just relax and pay attention moment to moment in your life, that is contemplation and meditation. If you just stop reacting to everything, is what I'm saying. If you give yourself just that second or two gap before you open your mouth or before you decide to, attach to that first thought in your head that reacts to the person that's talking to you, just give yourself that gap, and that is contemplation. Isn't it interesting? You switch the word, you stop using the word meditation, you start putting in contemplation, and all of a sudden it's like it takes on a whole new meaning. That's the fucking problem. That is exactly why I don't like the word meditation, is because it shouldn't take on a whole new meaning. Like, meditate on it should just mean contemplate, right? And does to anybody who knows enough about meditation. But you have your average superficial view of meditation and all things spiritual, right? Where it just becomes another fad. It becomes another coat to put on. It becomes another thing to do and another way to identify. And that is it. That's all it's all it is. And unfortunately, that is the case for a lot of people. These are the people who make TikTok videos talking about, like the journey of the soul after death. I just learned about this from Dolores Cannon. It's like I know what I'm talking about. And they got all these images in the background, the funky music, and you're just like, you read this out of a book. None of this is a result of contemplation. This is the result of you reading something that sounded good, sounded kind of cool. You decided you're going to use for your own, spread the word because people are going to look up to you. It has nothing to do with depth. It has nothing to do with you getting past your limitations. It has nothing to do with you experiencing life in a brand new way. Nothing. You've just put on a new coat.
yeah, exactly. And with that, like those types of things, I always find it interesting, and I certainly got into it for a while with, someone like Dolores Cannon who says things like that, and people who follow that, like any sort of belief system that you follow, if it isn't coming from you, you're just hearing something someone said. You're like, that sounds good. That makes me feel better. And then you just believe it. And like, that's it. Like, it's not even that deep. And I'm not saying deep in a sense of like, oh, you're not thinking deep into it. I'm just saying like, take myself for example. When I got into that, and I bring it up sometimes, but I was in it for like, I don't know, maybe a month. It wasn't like this extended time of my life. I was just like, soul contracts, that sounds interesting. That kind of makes me feel better. It feels like there's something bigger than me that I'm kind of a part of and following, and doesn't make me feel like I'm so lost, I guess. But it also takes away, it is entirely disempowering and makes you feel like, you know, if things are going bad for you, it's like your lot in life and it's your karma that you're working through. And it's like all this sort of shit. And it's very much reinforces your idea of yourself being separate from reality, and anything that does that is gonna disempower you and reinforce the root of your suffering being that idea of yourself that you're maintaining and then reinforcing and building and all that stuff. So I always just find it so interesting with any belief system that someone just hears a story, makes them feel better, makes them feel like they know what's happening. It kind of satisfies that craving for getting rid of their, the inherent uncertainty of reality, and they just believe it. And then they just hold on to it, and then they just defend it. And because most people are doing that, so much of our society is rooted, in believing just something that they hear. And it comes down to even God. Like every time someone brings up Sky Daddy, I'm like, that's just an idea that exists inside of your mind. Like so many people say things like, oh, God is good. God has done wonders for me. It's like, It's just a figment of your imagination that you're believing to be the truth. It's so interesting how people just cling to that like it's, oh, it's definite. Well, you can't prove he doesn't exist and blah, 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 blah. And all of these, any belief system, any thing that you hold on to, any story that you're told, and you're like, oh, yeah, that's probably true. It's like, is it? Have you ever actually even thought about it for yourself? Or did it just create enough cessation of your pain or uncertainty that you hold on to it and now you defend it? It's not even standing on anything. You just hear it and you're like, yeah, I don't know. That sounds good. Maybe it's that. I don't know. And it's a fucking figment of your imagination. It's just something that exists inside of your mind every single time. Any belief system, any narrative, any story, any conceptual idea isn't reality. It's not it. But we've gotten so far from recognizing reality for what it is, understanding that the description is not the described. Like our idea of the thing will never be the thing itself. It can be an idea of the thing, but it in no way replaces the thing. And we're, yeah, I mean, we talk about it all the time, but we're just constantly running through uncertainty, thinking that we can be certain about it and thinking there must be a way. So we're just holding on to all of these things and experiencing so many consequences along the way for not being in reality, like for being existing in this world entirely inside of our head based on our preferences, what makes us feel better, and then reinforcing it through just believing that someone else is doing all of it or there's something else happening other than the thing that we're doing all the time.
That's a good point. We have a comment. We have a few comments. One I wanted to address specifically. I see anyone practicing meditation as a plus for society, to be honest. And you know what? I'm not going to say you're necessarily wrong. I think the problem is that it's not just time that has to do with your progress in meditation. It's also the quality of your attention. Meditation can, in fact, put you backwards to some degree when it's used for egotistical purposes. As a few people have commented, I mean, it's very easy to hold on to meditation as something that gives you a sense of control as well as something that defines you as a peaceful and spiritual person. So in that case, yeah, meditation actually doesn't do you much good. And I know I've worked with plenty of clients who meditate and still go off the handle, have no sense of responsibility the rest of the time. But as long as they're meditating, they're doing the work. Kind of like life coaching. A lot of people go to life coaching for the sake of saying that they go to life coaching, for the appearance that it gives them, for the way that people perceive them, and even the way they perceive themselves. Does that mean they're making progress? Not necessarily. And the other comment said, like the Buddha said in the Lotus Sutra, eventually everyone will become a Buddha through those kinds of practices on a long enough timeline and with enough attention, for sure. Because you could meditate with very little attention every day of your life and have a full 100 years and still not reach any level of responsibility or self-awareness, depending on the level of attention and your accountability. Meditation itself will not do anything without you and your intention. If you're using meditation as a way to reinforce your ego, then no, it's not going to be a plus for anyone. And just to make a perfect example, Kim Jong-un, the dictator of North Korea, meditates.
Exactly. That's that's great. So, yeah, and there was a follow-up comment too. I used to use meditation as an idea of something that I could do to make me reinforce ideas of myself being peaceful. Exactly. Like any time we're reinforcing an idea of ourselves, like all of the other ideas are now at play. And if you're doing it to become more peaceful, or it's not even to be more peaceful, it's like to see yourself as more peaceful, to be able to say that you're more peaceful because you're meditating and just because you're meditating, not because of the way that you're spending your life, just because you're doing it. And you can see benefits to it, sure, but there's so much more to it. Like people like to think of these things as black and white, like, oh, you meditate and you're more peaceful. But there's 24 hours in a day. Even if you spend an hour meditating, it's like you still have the rest of your day to do things. And people will just use that, set aside that time and not carry any of those recognitions into the rest of their life. And so it, yeah, it can be detrimental just for so many reasons. And again, there are times where it can be beneficial, but usually the benefits are found when you realize that you don't need it anymore. And it could have actually been, I don't know, like more efficient not to, and just to pay attention to your life. And people will, take the excuse of, well, oh, I meditated and I let it go eventually, but it had its benefits at its time. And it's like, just because it was a step that you took doesn't mean it's the most efficient way of doing things. Doesn't mean it's the most efficient way of recognizing that you're just here now and you don't, any idea of yourself that you hold on to isn't the reality of you, and all of that stuff. So you can realize that you don't have to do it, and it isn't necessary for everyone. And just because you did it doesn't mean that you have to push everyone else to continue to do it. So yeah, I mean, it can in certain contexts, but it's all dependent on how people are spending the rest of their time doing things. Like, just in silo meditation, I would say isn't anything for society. It depends on how everyone else is spending the rest of their life. And we, as I was saying before, like, we kind of overhype the impact of it throughout the rest of our day, because we can sit down and meditate and immediately, or even while people do this, you've told the story before of a friend who was meditating, and you walked in their house and his wife or girlfriend is like, shh, he's meditating. You're like, well, then it shouldn't matter if I make a shitload of noise, right? You should be calm as fuck no matter what happens. Isn't that kind of the point? But exactly the case. Like, people get so caught in that, and they think that this is something that's improving their life, and so no one should disturb them, or else they won't fully get the entire benefits of meditation. It's like, no, it's still all happening, regardless of whether you're sitting down with your eyes closed. And actually, someone making a ruckus while you're doing so will actually cause that time that you're utilizing to meditate to be far more beneficial, because there are things that maybe you deem to be annoying that then you're sitting through and whatnot. So meditating in the face of someone making a bunch of noise is a way better way to meditate than just doing it in complete and total silence.
Yeah, absolutely. I just tossed a quote up from Alan Watts while we were discussing this. By the way, quick shout out to Restream.io, who we are using their platform for this this new interface. It's great being able to throw up these quotes and do all that. Like, you got to admit it adds something to the presentation, and it's really nice to have people be able to participate, and we can focus on one of their comments, for example, and bring it right up on screen. For example, this one: knowledge and books are a complete contrast to what spirituality actually points to. I don't know why spiritual gurus focus so much on imaginary concepts. Well, because they have to have something to teach, otherwise they're not a guru, right? If I don't have concepts to hand on to you, what the fuck do you need me for, right? All you got now is reality, and that's all you need, which is the funniest part, which is why Andrew and I very much make it clear all the time that we are not gurus. We don't teach anything. I got nothing to teach that I'm not learning myself. All I can do is pass on the stuff that I'm trying to apply and take accountability for. So all I can do is I can be vulnerable about my own journey. That is all. And if you want to walk with me for a bit, you can do that. Speaking of which, actually, we have a bunch of retreats coming up, and I wanted to make these announcements. There are 2 retreats that are already ready to go. There are some tickets left. The first one is going to be in the Netherlands in November, on November 11th to November 19th. It is a 9-day retreat. It's one of our long ones. This one's going to be the largest community event that Dualistic Unity has had to date. There's going to be 34 guests, not including Andrew and myself. There are approximately half the tickets left. Semi-private rooms, as well as a couple of shared rooms. There are some options for the ticket being approximately $2,000 for the full 9 days. That includes all your food, all your other stuff, quote unquote, and of course Andrew and my attention for the entire time that you're there, because we are there to connect with the community. So it's going to be an incredible event. I cannot recommend that you join us enough in the Netherlands. I'm fucking pumped. The tickets are available to the public right now on the website, dualisticunity.com. The second event that I wanted to bring up is a mini retreat, which means that it's only 4 days. It's from Thursday night to Monday morning. It's kind of the 9-day retreat, but compressed into a smaller period of time. This other mini retreat is coming up in February 1st to 5th. It's going to be in Virginia, near Virginia Beach, about a half hour away. Oceanfront. We're going to be sitting under the stars by the ocean together. There's going to be some indoor games. There's a lot of room. This mini retreat in February is going to have 14 guests. So it's going to be a good sized event as well. The largest mini retreat that we've had up until now. I'm pumped. Tickets are currently available to Tier 3 supporters who get early access until next week, and then Tier 2 after that, Tier 1 after that. Each tier on Patreon does get a significant discount. I want to mention that Tier 3 supporters on discount or on Patreon, on Discord. Tier 3 supporters on Patreon get a $350 discount on all retreat tickets. It's only $100 a month to be a Tier 3 supporter. I highly recommend it. If you come to all the retreats, you're saving money in the long run. Aside from that, Tier 2 saves $150 and Tier 1 saves $50. Last announcement, and I'll stop babbling about stuff that we're doing, but the reason I bring this up is because it's the connection. It really is. This is the thing that dawned on me at the last retreat, that the best thing I can do for you, for anyone who joins us here or in person, especially in person, is just to be there with them. It's just to be there. It's not try to be anything, not to try and bring them anywhere, not to try and teach them anything, but to just honestly be with them willingly, because who the fuck does that without some ulterior motive, trying to get somewhere themselves? Right? It's the same thing with meditation. Everybody's trying to meditate for a point. Nobody's fucking meditating. We are meditation. And I would love to share that with you in person. So if you can join us, we would love to see you. If we can, because these moments of connection are so powerful and they do mean so much to the community, and you can see the ripples in our conversations in our groups after the fact, we would like to do an event July 27th to July 31st in Vancouver, British Columbia in Canada, just outside the city. Great location. There's 8 potential spots available. We have not decided if we're doing this event as yet, but if you are interested, definitely let us know. There's a vote right now on Patreon. If you would like to come, we would love to see you. All we need is 8 people total. We're about halfway there. So that is an option. It's not something guaranteed, but it's definitely an option. After this live stream here, we're going to be on Patreon for another hour. This is a Tier 1 call, which means that you can join for only $5 a month. Or if you would like to actually just try it out for free, you can do that. There's a 7-day trial now on Patreon where you can join us, try out our group discussions 5 days a week, chat with us, chat with the community, get to know everyone, let down your walls, just be with us to the best of your ability. And you would be amazed how transformative it is to just be yourself. That's it. I'm done now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. Because those Patreon groups are always a blast, but also just a great place for people to connect and share kind of what they're going through, and realize that they're not alone in this conversation. Because what we get so often is that I don't have anyone to talk to about this. I don't have anyone to share these thoughts. People in my life, they don't want to talk about it. They don't think there's any use to this conversation, whatever it may be. And we can spend our whole life trying to convince people of this conversation, or we can just be free and lighter in ourselves, and that informs everything that we go through. And that's certainly what I've found in my life, is the less I try and get people to change or understand what I'm saying, the more curious they get about everything that we're talking about. But that said, it's a great place to actually connect with people, because so many people say that they have no one to talk to about it. There's so many people in our Patreon community talking about it. There's so many people on Discord. There's so many people who come to the retreats. It's like there's a massive group of people talking about it. So for everyone who feels like they have no one to talk to about it, there's lots of people doing it. We're doing it all the time. And the retreats are obviously a fantastic place to do that, especially because as we continue on, the retreats we're gonna keep them at different sizes, so people, depending on their comfort level, are willing to do to interact with more or less people. But as we go, they're definitely going to be bigger events, and that'll allow for more people to get involved, because tickets won't be as expensive for the larger ones, and it'll just be a place for more and more people to connect. And it's not even really about me or Ray necessarily. It's just about connecting people who are like-minded and willing to go through the discomfort of recognizing that everything's inherently uncertain, and there isn't anything that you have to settle upon. There aren't answers that you have to hold on to and find. You can just continue paying attention to reality in that spot of uncertainty and keep finding out more and more of what this all is, more and more of what you are, more and more of what you're capable of, because that's what we're doing too. We've talked plenty of times about spiritual gurus and all that shit, and there's such a assumption with those fuckers that they already get it. They already know it. They know all the answers. And I'm not saying that all of them push that sort of thing, but most do. They at least figure out something that helps them feel a little bit better, and then they package it up and teach it as a way of life, a way of living, the best way to live, the best way to feel more free in yourself, the best way to feel more at peace. But it comes with a cost. Like, there's something you have to settle upon in order to do that, because that's what they've settled upon, because continuing to step through uncertainty, which is all we're doing, is uncomfortable for them, and they feel better at a certain spot, and then they just settle. And so, whether it's the retreats, whether it's the podcast, whether it's the groups, like, we're not coming with answers. We're not telling you to follow us. We actually say entirely the opposite thing most of the time. Like, definitely don't follow us. Don't take anything we say at face value. Like, dig into it yourself. Like, meditate on it, contemplate it, dig into it, think about it, and just keep paying attention to everything that is, and you'll keep finding out. And we settle upon so many things, settle upon so many assumptions about ourselves. Like, I've even been seeing a lot of creators who probably sound similar to stuff we talk about, but they'll say, like, oh, no one knows anything. No one knows anything. I don't know anything. Everything's in question. But it's like, yeah, you say that, but then you're settling upon all these assumptions about what you are. It's like, you don't know what you are. Also, it's not just everything, quote unquote, outside of you, everything you perceive to be outside of you. It's everything, period, which includes you. And so I've just noticed a lot of people kind of pushing that, like, no one knows anything, and kind of settling upon that too. And it allows them to both hold on to what's making them comfortable and not continue to dig into everything that's going on here. Because you got to be willing to let go of everything you think you are in order to continue down that road of uncertainty. But there's so many people who are kind of pushing that narrative and still holding on to a lot of shit. And they don't even realize it, because there's so many underlying assumptions that our society holds on to. Like, no one knows anything. I don't know anything. No one knows what the fuck's going on here. It's like, I used to say that stuff all the time. And, like, we still can recognize that, but there's also things that are worth digging into. And sometimes, I don't know, there's some times where it just is kind of like, and people are like, no one knows anything, and I don't know anything, and we never will, and never can. It's like, it's stopping at a point. Like, it's settling upon even that assumption, because even that assumption is an assumption that you're settling upon that is worth questioning.
Yeah, they sound drunk. Like, it's whenever I hear somebody like, nobody, all right, yeah, nobody knows anything, nothing means anything. So it's like, sounds like somebody in the bush just had a few too many. I don't know what shit direction we're going. Who fucking cares? That kind of thing. Like, it's just the funniest thing, because it basically it equates to ignorance is bliss. And it's what we're trying to say throughout all of this is the knowing that they're talking about when they're like, nobody knows anything for sure, is conceptual knowing. See, they're trying to come to a conceptual answer. Well, nobody knows what the answer is. It's like, you see, you're dabbling in thought, you're playing in concepts, and so what you're dealing with there is just a fictitious game. Of course, there's no concept that's going to wrap up everything, but we're not talking about that when we're talking about knowing, are we? We're not talking about concepts when we're talking about self-knowledge. We're talking about a state of being. We're talking about a state of being aware, a state of depth, a state of sensitivity, a state of presence. It's knowing in the present sense, not knowing in the past sense, as if it was something learned. And that's what everybody's glomming to. Oh, nobody knows anything. Shut up and pay attention. You'd be amazed how much you know right now. Not conceptually, but in terms of sensitivity, how much you know you're having an impact on others, how much you know they're triggering you, how much you know you're avoiding certain things, how much you know you're not looking at certain things, how much you know you're responsible. You know all of these things in the moment. You know it all comes down to you. That's not a concept. That's a feeling. And it's one we run from. And so often when we're talking about spirituality and gurus, and I've talked about this, is the reason I don't like spirituality, because it's all conceptual. It's all conceptual trying to point at something that's not. And it's not until you get past the thing that, past the concept to the thing that's not a concept, that you actually start to develop some degree of sensitivity and awareness. It's not about knowledge as a concept. It's about awareness. It's about recognition, which is what we've talked about many times. And in very much, I think it was episode 4 or episode 3, the one-step process. It's always just recognition. That's not the memorization of a concept. That's not learning a new concept. It's a moment of recognition that then you translate into a concept to try and describe, and unfortunately destroy in doing so.
Exactly. Because maybe we don't know things exactly. We don't know things conceptually, but you know that you're here now, and you know that there are things happening, and being willing to look at them without the conceptual ideas is what allows you to dig into them. And we settle upon like just all concepts. Yeah, that's exactly it. Like everyone who's saying like no one knows anything, like they're still very much entirely living in a conceptual world because they haven't a conceptual idea of themselves. And so if yourself is conceptual and you're maintaining that idea, then everything almost by design has to be conceptual. Like is that the case then, that if you're maintaining a conceptual idea of yourself, everything else is a reflection of that conceptual? And so if you don't have so much of a conceptual idea of yourself, you can start to see that everything else isn't as conceptual. So it's always through you. And that's why if someone's maintaining a conceptual idea of themselves and then saying things like, "Oh, everything's me, I'm everything, everything's one, everything's connected," like it's very much on the conceptual side of it as opposed to the recognition. But when you understand that you're not a concept, there's no conceptual idea that can adequately define or describe you, you start to see yourself in everything through that. So it's always through you and what you're maintaining in regards to yourself and or letting go of in regards to yourself.
So that's really interesting, because the problem isn't necessarily what we're conceptualizing. It's our belief in conceptualizing, right? What's the payoff to being able to conceptualize? What's the payoff to believing that a concept can in fact reflect truth, that a concept can in fact be relied upon in order to live your life, in order to align with reality? What's the payoff of going, no, as soon as I get that into an idea, I'm good? You see the payoff? There's an end result where there's a cessation of uncertainty, right? It's that. That's what it is. It's the fact that the concept is almost too tasty to pass up. It seems so simple. Like, look, just take this and all your problems are going away, because now you know. Now you know. And that's the problem, is that concepts aren't knowledge, right? Concepts are descriptions. That's all they are. And we mistake that. We mistake that because, frankly, it's uncomfortable otherwise. It's uncomfortable to recognize that no concept you'll ever settle on is going to be the truth, that there's always more to it that perhaps you're not willing to see simply because you don't believe in your ability to face that uncertainty. Perhaps you don't think that you are enough to see. Perhaps you just have ideas about yourself not being able to see for numerous different reasons, but it's all the idea of yourself and fear, right? And otherwise, you're just willing to keep looking at life. You're willing to keep contemplating. You're willing to keep meditating without it actually being meditation, because that's all it is. Self-awareness, that's all it is.
Yeah. So it's always going through you, and I guess that makes sense then with the conceptual ideas. Like it gives you that perceived end result that doesn't actually exist. So it's like you're continuing, like reality is continuing on, and you're stopping and you're settling and like making camp in a certain spot. It's like it's going to keep going. And if you don't keep paying attention, like if you start paying attention to the conceptual idea as opposed to the reality of it, it's going to inevitably have consequences as reality continues to flow because your idea of it is no longer it. Like maybe it was for a fleeting moment and you took that moment and then conceptualized it and organized it and then it turned into this whole fucking thing that wasn't it. Like as soon as you came up with some conceptual idea of it, immediately it wasn't it anymore. Like there wasn't even a moment where it was it. It was just that you had an experience and something you got a certain outcome. You're just like, oh yeah, this is it. And then that was it. And then you stop paying attention. But there's always going to be detrimental consequences to doing so because reality is continuing on. And so as we settle upon that and start believing in that, we're not seeing reality for what it is, even if we were for a while seeing reality for what it was. And then we got to a spot where it's like, okay, this is it now. And then we get comfortable. And there's so many things in our society that are reinforcing that, the desire to make a bunch of money, the desire because we don't have faith in ourselves, we need all of those securities and external sources in order to feel better about ourselves, in order to feel better about our life, in order to feel like we have value. And as we've said before, as soon as you think your value can be raised, you don't recognize that you are value. As soon as you think there's any way to improve that value or raise that value, you're not recognizing that you are inherently value, that you are reality itself. You have conceptually separated yourself from the experience of being what is. As soon as you buy into any idea that your value can go up in any way, and as soon as you do that, there's the risk of your value going down. And so there's so many consequences to setting up camp outside of the flow of reality, separating yourself. And then with that camp, with that conceptual idea that you settle upon, you're defining yourself. And maybe you do so because you've defined yourself in a specific way that then you need to conceptualize some idea of what reality is in order to reinforce that idea of yourself or make sense of it or kind of build this whole situation around that idea of yourself that you're holding on to. And so it's always through you that these things are done. And so you have to come back to recognizing that you're not what you think you are. You're never what you think you are. Where your value, you perceive your value to lie, is never actually where it lies. Like you can never know where you fit or how you're doing. But we run from that recognition. We try and settle upon something, but again, always consequences.
Yeah, it dawns on me why. Why do we stop? Why do we get out of the flow and set up camp other than to wait for others, to hope to lead others, to not be alone? Because I mean, that's ultimately what it is to be in the flow, is to be the flow, which is an act of self-responsibility. It's an act of individuality as well as the collective, but it is definitely an act of one. It's an act of unity. And that's what letting go is. And yet we stop because we're like, Jesus, it'd be nice if there were other people. I'm going to stop and set up camp. And oh, look, there's people behind me. And we all end up just kind of milling about together because we don't want to accept the reality that we are everything, that we're all one, that this is all you at the end of the day. And that if you were to just continue with the flow, if you were to just continue down the river, as it were, somebody is going to go, look at that crazy fucker, and do it too, because they're inspired to do so rather than just milling about, because we've been doing that forever. And look at the mess we're making. The camp is it's chaos. There's garbage everywhere. Nobody's doing anything. We're all lazy, arguing about who's better. Meanwhile, there's this flow just awaiting, right? And we're all too scared to go down it. And so, yeah, if one of us is just like, fuck it, I'm doing it for me, somebody else might notice. And then if that person says, fuck it, I'm doing it for me, somebody else might notice. And before you know it, the camp's emptying out and the flow is being participated in again. And the only danger, the only temptation is to stop once again, to wait for quote unquote others, which is really just our justification for not wanting to be the all of everything that is that flow.
Exactly. Damn. It's all it's funny how everything we do is a avoidance of being alone, like doing it for ourselves, living for the sake of living our life. And we're like always utilizing quote unquote other people in order to avoid that recognition, like the depth of that. And so it's I always find it funny how seeing, the depth of that is that you are always alone in that. And one of people's biggest fears is being alone and loneliness, and just how well that's reflected in society, like the reality of the situation. But when you feel like you're separate, you're maintaining a conceptual idea of yourself that's alone, it's very, very uncomfortable. And so we're always doing things to avoid that. And so conceptualizing those ideas, settling upon that, making camp, as you said, is just a means to allow ourselves to perceive other people or maintain the idea that other people even exist. Because without the conceptual idea of, or all of the conceptual ideas of other people, there aren't any. And you start to see that all of the other people you're perceiving are just reality itself that you also are, as opposed to this separate thing with this separate idea, this separate name, this separate story. It's like you're the one maintaining that. And because you don't like doing it alone, doing it for you, doing it for the sake of doing it, which is what we were talking about with meditation. The only way to actually live is to do the thing that you're doing for the sake of doing it. And so when we do things for an ulterior motive, it's always in regards to other people. Like we want to be seen in a certain way, looked at in a certain way, perceived in a certain way. We want our value to be measured in a certain way. And who's measuring that? Other people. It's not ourselves. We're doing it just for ourselves, not considering the opinions of other people. Everything we do is for the sake of doing it. Because when we do things for ulterior motives, it's essentially always for another person. And it's we say it's to feel better, but really it's just to reinforce that other people even exist.
That's really interesting, because the alternative is again the realization. It's like we're holding off the clarity that comes with letting go of the flow. Because when we're talking about the flow, like what we're really talking about is just the flow of intelligence, right? It's kind of like an individual. An individual can be a very insightful person, a very insightful being, unless they're caught up in shit tons of narratives, conflicting different stories about themselves, and all of a sudden, all of that clarity, all of that intelligence just vanishes. And it just vanishes because it's caught up in distractions. Well, the flow that we keep talking about is really the flow of our collective intelligence. It's us working together as one, but we're all stepping outside of that out of fear, right? And so it's interesting because you almost, when we're talking about going in and out of the flow, we're almost thinking about like human beings stepping in and out of a river. But imagine, in fact, that it's just a piece of the river suddenly forming a body out of water and leaving the river. So all of a sudden, you have all these quote unquote water people that aren't in the river. So the river's dried up. There's not as much water. There's not as much flow. There's not as much intelligence. And then we look at the planet around us. We look at how we live collectively and we wonder why we're so fucking stupid. It's because we're not actually working together and allowing our intelligence to flow collectively because we're too busy holding on to these conceptual ideas that keep us separate. We keep trying to come up with the answer, and the answer is get out of the way, come together, allow our intelligence to actually start to reflect. But all of our intelligence gets caught up in egotism, in politics, in religion, and spirituality. It all gets caught up in control. It all gets caught up in a game, rather than just allowing itself to reflect through everyone. And it can only do so with less division, right? We know this from numerous studies over the years, that children who feel more safe, children who feel more connected, children who are nurtured, children who are encouraged, children who feel like they're actually aligned with those around them, learn faster. They learn faster, they act differently, they make better choices, they're more empathetic. And yet we can't seem to turn this prison planet into anything like that. The older they get, the more divided they become, because of course you got to survive. right? And this just continues on. Well, why? Well, because we are stagnated collectively in our intelligence. We are stuck at this teenage level of egotism. And we're so busy trying to fit into a popularity contest that doesn't fucking exist that we're not growing up. We're not allowing ourselves to achieve clarity. And it's just because we're too fucking divided in ourselves. It's me that's the problem. Me. And only me. That's it. And when every single one of us takes that stance, that's when things change.
Ooh, I like that bit right there. Oh man, because we've talked about before, like the leaving the river and how it's like being in the river, being in the flow, being the river is like this endless resource of nutrients, intelligence, whatever. It's everlasting life is that experience. And so when we leave that, when we perceive ourselves to be divided, we actually get in the way, but it's like we're still that everlasting life, just having an experience of not being so because and partially and going back to all this spiritual guru stuff, like they think that that's the truth. Like, oh, I'm a spiritual being experiencing a human whatever and all that shit. It's like, no, you're just what is. You're not anything separate from anything. Your reality itself, experiencing itself. There's nothing that isn't you. It's always been you,
Is
just
that
you.
not enough?
Exactly. Right. And so we separate. We're the river, and there's all these like water people walking around, like slowly draining themselves of the water because they try and control everything that's happening. They try and control the situation. They try and like build themselves up and see themselves in another way, and it's all in comparison and how good they can feel relative to the rest of the river people that have separated themselves from the river. And so they're looking at themselves, the river itself, looking at itself, determining where they fit relative to the rest of itself when it's just itself interacting with itself. Always. It's just yourself interacting with yourself all the time. And we think that those things, those comparisons, those judgments, those relative perceptions of us versus them, us versus other people mean something. We actually think that there's a piece of them that exists in reality, and they're all just assumptions, always just assumptions. And so we're existing in this entirely assumptive, presumptive world that isn't actually reality. Like it's not actually happening in the way that we think that it's happening. And we're running around pointing at ourselves, judging ourselves, yelling at ourselves, killing ourselves, not realizing that it's all just you. Like it's always just you. And when you come back to that, like, oh my goodness. And the river people, I'm liking the river people analogy too. Like they don't realize that all of their ideas of other people, everything that they're holding onto about themselves is just conceptual ideas that they're maintaining in order to not recognize that it's all just them. That's all that we're doing, holding on to concepts, is just keeping the recognition of it all being you at bay. Because as long as you believe those concepts to be the truth, you don't see that it's all you. But without those, it becomes a lot clearer. It becomes a lot more obvious when you stop living in that conceptual world so much. And then you see that you're just always interacting with yourself. You're just always maintaining a story in order to avoid that recognition because you think that's where your value comes from, is always in comparison. It is always in relativity because it has to be if you're perceiving yourself as something that isn't everything else.
Exactly. I'm very much digging the image of the river people. We're going to have to talk about expanding on that at some point because I think there's some potential there. Absolutely. I want to mention very quickly, because we have 20 minutes left of this live stream, that if anybody would like to join us after this for an hour group conversation, please do so. There is a 7-day free trial available on our Patreon page now, patreon.com/dualistic unity. You can join us for any of the 5-day or 5 chats that we do every week. Some of them last an hour and a half. We do a tier 3 call every Sunday that is exclusively for tier 3 supporters. It's 2 hours long. We talk about a bunch of stuff, including our upcoming book that we've been working on the side. Though, admittedly, I have a few other ideas for perhaps some children's book or some short novels. I've got a couple of ideas that we can play with. Aside from that, I also want to mention that we would love to share this live stream on LinkedIn, but unfortunately, LinkedIn is at the moment not letting us do that because we don't have the 150 followers on our LinkedIn page that we need to do so. If you are on LinkedIn and you would like to join us, please do follow us. The link is there on the side. It's in the chat section as well as a QR code that's on the screen. We would really appreciate you joining us on there. We have a lot in the works, not just retreats and stuff like that, but ultimately we are hoping to work our way towards a year-round full-time retreat center that would be available for the community, possibly more than one on different continents, basically as a resource for this growing conversation, a place for people to come together so that way we can save on the overhead and the ticket price and everything else and just drop things. So that way we can actually start perpetuating this in a way where we're able to use the resources that we're pulling in to push them back out to keep this conversation going. And of course, one day we're going to get our fucking billboard in Times Square. You are one, or you are all, or whatever it is. We are one, I am you. We're just going to keep it going because why the fuck not? Nobody's going to do that. No branding on it. That's super important. It should be just one giant question mark for everyone. Who the fuck would put that there? And the answer is you.
Oh yeah, so many ideas and things to do to get this message out there, and just the most basic message there is, the most straightforward, the thing that's we're all doing all the time when we're not maintaining the stories. Like, it's just becomes so much more obvious when you understand that thoughts aren't truth. Your ideas of things are not the things themselves. Like, it becomes glaringly obvious when you start to see that and let go of that need for the false certainty that you've held on to for so long. And I find I was even thinking about this recently, just how people live who hold on to belief systems or ideas and stories that they cling to and defend and believe in. Because even when I was Catholic and religious, like, I never held on to them that tightly. It was always like, just to feel a little bit better about death, and like, oh, if I'm a good person, I'll go to heaven. So it was never really that top of mind. And I find it interesting, like, I was thinking about if I did still hold on to that stuff or still believe it or was, like, an adamant believer, like, that's exhausting. It's really tiring to maintain that whole idea of what God is, what God wants, how I fit in, what I am, and what I believe in, and all that shit. Like, without all that, you're way more weightless. And I was just thinking about it, just in because relatively you don't recognize the changes in yourself as you're going through it. It's kind of like, as you grow, you don't notice yourself growing, or your child growing. You don't notice it because you're seeing them every day. We don't realize the differences in our lives as we as we let go of certain concepts, ideas, stories about what's happening. But as you do, like, the relative experience is so interesting. Like, it's so much more weightless. And I find it funny, even if Sky Daddy was what everyone believes him to be, why would he need people to believe in him? Isn't it so obvious that it's just you maintaining it in order for you to feel better? Like, isn't isn't it so clear? Like, if it was a God all and everything, like, why the fuck would he need you to believe in him or to worship him? Like, it really does. You said this before, like, it sounds like an incredibly insecure God. Because it does. If there's any degree of a need for people to believe in it or him, or preach his word, it's like he's already everything everywhere all the time. Why the fuck would he need you to do anything for him? Like, that's I don't know, kind of entitled and also just ridiculous to think that that would be a need for this all-powerful, all-knowing thing.
Yeah, it sounds. It definitely doesn't achieve the godlike status that I would assume to attribute to something that was limitless and eternal. At the most, it sounds kind of like a low level demigod, or maybe just a children's magician, that kind of thing. Someone you're not expecting too much from. Like we really got to help him along. Like, oh Jesus, like Bozo the magician here has forgotten his pigeon. Somebody go and get him a bird. That kind of thing. Like it's just, and that's the problem with monotheism, is that you're super important in there. And I always find it funny that it seems like the monotheistic God needs attention and worship in the same way as its followers. Ever notice everybody wants a lot of attention? Look how much I worship God. Look at me. And it's a big thing in terms of how pious you are and how often you go to church and how much you volunteer and wearing your Sunday best, all that shit. And it really just becomes a competition and about as far from the actual recognition of God and unity and peace as you can get at the end of the day. Because, and again, this is the problem, is that it's become spiritual, it's become a matter of belief, it's become a matter of concepts, it's become a matter of playing in the mind, and basically just, I don't know, collectively accepted delusion, more or less, just the idea that concepts and thoughts can ever be reality whatsoever. And so that's all we're playing with most of the time. I mean, science does its best to get past that. I mean, by just calling it what it is. Like, all right, we're going to give that a name. It's the best we can do now. Higgs boson. All right, cool. And it's like, what do we know? What do we know about it? We know this and this and this based on observation, but we're not just making up beliefs. We're just observing and trying to come up with ideas that we admit are theories. But even there, some people get carried away. They're like, no, 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 no. Everybody agrees that theory is the truth. Therefore, it's not a theory anymore. It's like, that doesn't actually change the nature of it being a theory ever. Right. I was reading an article the other day. I thought this was really interesting because we talk about the Big Bang and how everybody's just like, nope. Obviously, there's a trail of light moving in one direction. We know the universe is expanding, therefore it's got to be a Big Bang. Well, now there's an article coming out where they're actually like, that actually might be kind of an illusion based on the universe itself gaining mass. So it's not actually expanding. It's just that it appears to be expanding because of our relative perspective of that process unfolding. I was like, well, that's real interesting. But that's what I mean. It's just like, we don't know. We don't know. What we know is what we're observing from our current state of mind, our current perception. Now, as soon as we change our perception or our understanding of where we fit in all of this, our perception of everything else changes as well. Right? And so that's the thing. It's just, are we going to settle on certainty? Are we going to settle on an idea? Are we going to settle on a concept? And as soon as we do, we're no longer in reality. And we've forgotten that collectively. I have forgotten that. Even the idea of we as a concept. All that is to me is me right now having this experience. You are still me. I am still me. Everyone watching this is me. And what's funny is they're like, well, I'm not me, which is hilarious because they just, of course you're me, right? The difference is that you think that me doesn't include everything else because your idea of you doesn't allow that to be the case. You're sitting right now as the moment, thinking that there's anything other than the moment for anyone, anywhere, ever. That's all there ever is. And the reality is that they're all me from their perspective. Because, of course, we're all the same me. We just keep getting lost in names and concepts and ideas. We're like, oh, wow, this is fucking huge. It's got to be source consciousness, universal awareness, the ultimate intelligence that's making sure everything's going to be fine. Why do I want to believe that? Because otherwise I have to be aware and paying attention to what I'm doing right fucking now. Really, really want someone to take the lead on this one. Really, really want someone to be responsible. So it's not just me. There's a larger intelligence.
Oh man, it's funny to see how like all the different ways that we avoid that. And even in that, like it's such a basic recognition. Like even that, you're me. You are me. You identify as me, as do I. Everything is also me. And everything we do is an avoidance of that. And it's like we're existing based on a false assumption. Like, so everything the ways that we look at reality, the ways that we look at things, the theories we come up with are all standing on this bullshit assumption, like this layer that's all bullshit. And that's where our entire society stems from, is that the assumption that I am something separate from everything else. And it's always through that. And as you maintain the conceptual idea of you, it doesn't align with the conceptual idea of everything else. And so we're all holding on to that assumption, thinking that we can, understand reality or understand what's going on. And it's all from this fictitious assumption. And that's where everything's stemming from. And so with that, with the even the conversation of the Big Bang is seen as something that's separate from us. But seeing that is just, the perception of time, the perception of space, as opposed to the reality of it, it totally changes the way you think about that. So with the thing that you're reading, is that, our perception that the universe is expanding, but it's just that it's like, because we're perceiving a division in things like space not being what is, we think that things are expanding within space, but space already is what is. And so there's not even an expansion. It's like an expansion of our perception of division, the things that we perceive separate from other things, separate from us, separate from space. And we see ourselves as something separate from space. And so therefore everything else that isn't space must be separate from it. And so therefore, if it's expanding through space, but space is what is. And so there is no expansion or contraction. It already is what is. And then, so we start thinking about, or at least I start thinking about, the universe expanding in a way, and then space being like, say, the box on this screen right now. And it's expanding. We're like, okay, but space is what is. But there's no edge to space. Like it's infinite in our mind. It's tough for my mind to wrap around that eternity. Like it really can't, because the mind conceptualizes things. And so there has to be an edge, but you get to that edge and it's like, there's still more. And so you expand that edge a little bit, and then like, no, there's still more. And then it all keeps going. And that's when, I don't know, at least for me, it starts, like, the paradox comes into play, and then it's like expanding out, kind of in that Simpsons episode with Homer expanding out from their house, from his head, and then you realize that everything that was outside was inside of his head. And so that's where, it's not to say that it ends, because there is no end to that, but that's, I don't know, where it gets to when you just keep going with that. Eventually you realize that this is all within and without, quote unquote, your mind, because there is no your mind, because there is no you separate from anything else.
Exactly. I'm going to post the link to this article in the comments section here, just because it's a good read. It was basically something that was detailed in a paper published on June 2nd in the Journal of Classical and Quantum Gravity by the University of Geneva professor of theoretical physics, Lucas Lumbreiser. Basically, what he's saying is the expansion of the universe could be a mirage. A potentially new controversial study suggests this rethinking of the cosmos also suggests solutions for the puzzles of dark energy and dark matter, which scientists believe account for around 95% of the universe's total energy and matter, but remain shrouded in mystery. Basically, the point behind all of this, and I'm going to try and find if there's a quick summary, is simply that, as with everything in reality, we're looking at something that's based upon our current perception of reality. We're looking at it in a way that isn't necessarily the case. And that's all they're saying, is that perhaps what we're seeing isn't the reality. Perhaps what we're seeing is based upon the experience that we're having. And if we could separate from that, there might be something else. And so apparently this accounts for a great deal of headaches in terms of mathematics and whatnot. I encourage you to check out the article, because it's really interesting. I'm not a scientist, not going to claim to be a scientist, but I will say that I laugh whole fucking heartedly every time I read an article. It's like, maybe we didn't know, because of course you don't. And that shit happens all the time. all the time. It's just that a lot of people don't want to look at it. They're like, no, science knows. Science knows how we got here, where we're going, what this is all about. Because the alternative is fucking terrifying to me. The alternative is that I'm just here now. And that's the all and everything that I can do with everything, is be here now. And you know what? That might sound terrifying if you don't believe in yourself, but understand, the only thing you're not believing in is your idea of yourself. You're not actually not believing in yourself. That's the funny part about self-doubt, right? Is that you're not doubting yourself. You're doubting the fiction in your head. And you should, because it's full of shit. Of course you doubt the fiction in your head. Of course you're experiencing self-doubt. You're relying on an idea that can't possibly live up to its promise. What you can do, though, is have faith, not in the idea of yourself, just in the fact that if you pay attention, moving forward one moment at a time, if you have sensitivity, if you have the ability to just learn, take in context, and not judge your progress, ultimately, those moments are going to be about the best outcome that they could be, because you're working with what you have and you're putting all of your attention and all of your focus, you're quote unquote meditating on it, you're contemplating it, you're in it. That's the all and everything. And oddly enough, the gateway to heaven on earth, if carried far enough, long enough, and by enough of me, right? And that's all it is. That's all it is. But we miss that, and it's just because, as simple as it is, it's almost too simple. We want something complicated. We want something that disempowers us, because the alternative is that we have to actually use our power.
It's almost too simple. I like that, because it is like we want something to dig into that we can know. Like, we don't want to just be willing to keep finding out. We want to be able to box it all up, but there's no way to actually do that. It's just where you feel comfortable is where you stop. And in regards to that self-doubt, I like that one too. Saying a lot of good shit this episode, Ray. But yeah, because it's never you.
Yes, you are.
It's never you. It's always some bullshit idea that you're afraid of changing, I guess. Like, when you doubt, it's like I'm maintaining an idea of myself that I'm afraid of changing. You don't know how it's going to change. It's going to change. And so we almost avoid certain situations out of fear of it changing, as opposed to out of fear of it being diminished. Like, I've never really thought of it like that.
It's the stability.
Yeah.
Right? An idea of myself that can be changed is not something I can stand on it with any degree of certainty, right?
Exactly. But it's always in flux. It's always changing, because it doesn't exist in reality. Like, it's not
That's freedom.
what you think. And that's freedom. Exactly. Huh.
Whew. This has been a fun one. Absolutely. I am looking forward to the tier 1 call immediately after this. I'll throw a QR code quickly on the screen for anybody who would like to join us. And again, there's 3 different tiers. There's a bunch of different benefits for joining those tiers, including a copy of my ebook from 10 plus years ago, and Andrew's ebook from more recently written. There's a bunch of stuff, and including some articles I wrote back when I first woke up and came out of the rainforest back in 2006, 2007. I call it Ray's Archive, and I throw those up every once in a while. So if you'd like to join us, we would love to see you. This has been a damn good talk. I'm looking forward to this afternoon's episode. I'll pass it over to Andrew here, but thank you. Everyone, do join us on Patreon if you can. If not, we will see you tomorrow for the call-in show at 6 p.m. Eastern time here on Twitch.
Fuck yeah. Appreciate everyone who tuned in. Hop on Patreon. We'll see you in 15 minutes. And if not, we'll talk to you.